AITA for asking future Mill not to tell my toddler they make her sad. My 28F oldest son is 3 yo my fiance's 32M mom came over few weeks ago and when leaving, asked my 3 yo for a hug. He initially said, no, and walked away. Came back unprompted and hugged her. She said, oh good BC I was going to be sad. W my fiance's aunts and best friends edits. I sent her this. Summed up. We're teaching 3 yo that he's in control of his own body and self-defined boundaries regardless of how it makes someone feel. If he's trying to make someone upset on purpose, that's a different story. We don't want him to go against his boundaries to make someone feel better. I'm sure you just want to show he's important to you, but we'd appreciate it if you could show it in a different way. FMIL. Op. I'd appreciate you not sending me these kinds of messages and we have these conversations in person. Thank you. Op. I don't really see a difference, to be honest. I would have said the same things in person. I didn't see this topic as one that needs to be discussed too much. If you have a response, I'm obviously open to hearing it, but it won't change the fact that saying things that could make my kids feel guilty and responsible for others' feelings will be accepted. Again, you can show that you care for the boys, but not in ways that make them feel bad. FMIL. BC having adult conversation via text I believe are pretty cowardice. When you address me or any other adult via text, it's not really appropriate. So I will end this conversation with, if you can't talk things over with me instead of telling me what not to do, then that in itself is a problem. So I'm done. Op. Again, I would say the same words to you in person. Nothing cowardice about the method I choose to say these words. The reason I didn't see it made sense to do it in person is BC I'm essentially asking you a favor and it's your choice to acknowledge it or not. I wasn't looking for a debate about it. Just asking that you please not make certain comments to my babies. I'm alright if she'd prefer me to discuss something like this in person. But why ignore my initial message? Seems like blame shifting, diverting to me. She then went to my fiancé and texted him. So by now I'm sure, Op, told you she was messaging me. If you guys have something you need to say to me, just say it. They had a 30 minutes phone call and my fiancé told me she said she's already distanced herself from coming over and she'll distance herself more if she has to. It's not something she was doing intentionally. I never said it was intentional. Just bringing her attention to this and potential repercussions. Chose to message her BC I'm horrible at having deep, stressful convos in person. I have ADHD so can't process what I want to say and what other person has said and formulate responses, etc. Also this is a boundary, so not RLY up for discussion or debate. Either she chooses to stop or doesn't. AITA for asking this or how I brought it up. Once she responded, your only response should have been, okay. Talk soon. Quote. I'm going to give you a lopsided esh with the scales tipped in your favor. I agree with you at every turn, but this was not the conversation to have via text. It comes across as passive-aggressive. I 1000% understand the whole in-person conversation thing, but words are only like 0.7% of our communication tools. Most of the rest is tone and body language, which does not come across in text. That said, Mill can F right off with this. BC having adult conversation via text I believe are pretty cowardice. When you address me or any other adult via text, it's not really appropriate. So I will end this conversation with, if you can't talk things over with me instead of telling me what not to do, then that in itself is a problem. So I'm done. Your message was pretty well thought out and explained everything. There's no room for discussion. Children have bodily autonomy like any other person. Your fiancé needs to call his mother and have these discussions with her, not you after the fact. NTA. She's an ass. She'll distance herself more if she has to, promise? NTA. There was no need for an in-person conversation. If being told not to use language that teaches kids they're responsible for your feelings sends you into a tizzy, maybe you need therapy. Addressing an issue immediately is important, not waiting until later. And really it was a pretty minor ask. NTA. If she does it again, just say to your child in front of her, just because she is going to be sad doesn't mean you have to hug her. You are not doing anything wrong. Then she can enjoy that awkwardness of the face-to-face interaction she so desperately wanted. NTA. She only has a problem with you texting because then she can't turn around and say she didn't. No, you didn't tell her when she does this again. It wasn't a big deal. You were just sending her an FYI in future, please don't do this type message. It didn't need to be a full sit-down conversation. She's very defensive. Seems I'm in the minority, but I think NTA. You've made a decision as a parent and you informed her. Maybe it would have been better to do it in person, but I think it was fine. However, it might be easier if you tell her about how you struggle to collect your thoughts in person, and perhaps offer some sort of compromise for future convos. You could try collecting your thoughts in a note on your phone and then reading them to her aloud. In person, ideally with your husband there as support. That way she has an in-person convo but you don't feel totally unprepared, discombobulated. He came back and gave her a hug. She didn't say it when he told her no, therefore she wasn't manipulating him but stating, I'd be sad if you didn't want to hug him. Would he be expected to learn that voicing how that makes him feel is wrong? There will be kids at school who will or won't want to play with him, share a toy, eat lunch together, etc. It'd be wrong to teach him in those times to attempt to emotionally manipulate them, but it's not wrong or manipulative to communicate how one's actions can make others feel. I'm prepared for the downvotes, but in this specific situation, YTAH. Big fat NTA. It's so funny how I'm willing to bet everyone defending the mill has no early childhood education experience. Most children are SAED by a family member or trusted adult. And many don't say anything ever or for a very long time. This can easily be because they believe that adults are right and their opinions and emotions are more important than theirs, because that is what parents, adults in their life taught them. Children are to be seen and not heard. People want to act like it's making a child selfish or etc., but teaching a child to make the best decision for themselves regardless of how it makes others feel is important. It does not make them selfish if you are also teaching them empathy. Understanding to put yourself first is so important to protect these children because parents will not always be there, and they need the tools to make the right decisions for themselves. Children are people and not to be trained like dogs. An obedient child does not mean a good child. You are doing the right thing up. And remember, there's tons of bad parents, people, or ignorant parents, people who will make you think you are doing things wrong. Don't let them sway you. You are actively providing your child important life skills so that they can deal with people like that later in life. NTA. If Mill wanted to express her feelings, she could have said thank you for the hug, or I love your hugs. There was no reason to express her feelings based on a scenario that didn't happen. These comments are insane to me. NTA. As someone with those annoying grandparents that will guilt trip you and hound you into giving them a hug and a kiss, you're doing well op. And to everyone saying Mill didn't do that, no, she didn't this time, but she might next time. Or OP's son will remember this, his grandma said last time she visited. If he didn't give her a hug she would be sad, so next time he may give her one even if he doesn't want to, because he doesn't want to upset her. What Mill did may not have been malicious or even conscious, but it is making a child feel responsible for your feelings, and what Op said was perfectly reasonable. I see no reason why this conversation had to happen in person. It would have been a waste of a journey in my opinion, because Op would say her piece and then all Mill needs to do is say okay and agree. She doesn't have a choice really, or much room to debate. It's not her kid. Also, Mill did not set a boundary. People need to learn the difference between a preference and a boundary. If not texting about important issues was a boundary for Mill, she wouldn't have continued to reply and then proceed to text OP's husband about the issue. She just wanted to distract from what Op said, and so took issue with how Op presented this to her. I guarantee if this conversation had happened in person she would have found something else to complain about. And why does OP's preference for texting not matter, but MIL's alleged preference for talking in person does? Op. Your NTA. If your Mill has different communication needs to yours, it's her responsibility. Instead of immediately getting defensive and diverting to say, could we continue this discussion in person because I really care but have difficulty texting serious convos. You are right to set boundaries and protect your kids' rights to set boundaries. You are communicating in the way that works best for you. I have an easier time articulating my thoughts and choosing words well in writing too. And if she needs something else, that's okay. Neither one of you is inherently wrong for having preferences. What's wrong is how she couldn't just ask for what she needed and been willing to accept that. Even if she doesn't quite get the reason you're setting the boundary, she can still accept it without pulling away and emotionally punishing you and your family for having perfectly reasonable boundaries. I have problems with my Mill and siblings-in-law because they will send really ugly and angry messages, and then when I see them in person act like it never happened. To me that feels like gaslighting and manipulative behavior. But if both people are willing to talk in person or just generally respect each other's needs and compromise on that, then it really shouldn't be a problem no matter what format the conversation was begun in. Good luck, Op. Family can be so hard-faced with peeking eye. Edit. Spelling. NTA. You handled it perfectly fine. And it's absolutely a reasonable request. I'd have done the same. Honestly. It sounds like your FMIL is getting all defensive. BC, you put up a boundary and she isn't happy about it. That's a her problem and not a you problem. It's also acceptable to send her a message via text or email, and if she respected you and your boundaries, she would have no problem with your request and she'd make a solid effort to change her behavior. For what it's worth, body autonomy is super important to teach kids. And I have zero tolerance for people forcing affection on them just because they think they're entitled to it. NTA. To me, this is a red flag. The other party is dodging the issue. People with manipulative and/or bullying personalities want to talk in person because that's when they can do their best manipulation, bullying. They don't like conversations where you have time to think about your responses and can control whether or not you engage with them. I have experienced this with my ex-wife and with a close relative. I would encourage you to avoid in-person conversations on sensitive topics with this person if you can. Obviously, I don't know much about your situation or this person, but your description of the conversation reminds me of conversations I've had with toxic family members. NTA. And it sounds like Mill is a pretty good manipulator, trying to act all high and mighty and more mature by suggesting the conversation be had in person. If that's how she wants to communicate on further issues, then fine. She has the right to address that at the appropriate time, but she used that to deflect the exact issue you were presenting. Sounds like she's got an old school mindset, and rather than simply saying, okay, and learning moving forward, she wanted to make it about your communication style. Text leaves a definitive trail with no room to spin the narrative, so makes sense to me she doesn't want to talk that way. Also, her admitting she's stepped back shows she wants things her way over respecting her grandchildren and their parents. This started out as a generational thing. Boomer doesn't like that you communicated via text. Boomer doesn't understand why it may not be kosher to force kids into unwanted acts of affection. It was your message to communicate however you want to communicate it. However, I probably would have stopped after your second response, because she was clear she didn't want to talk about it via text. You said your piece and it didn't need to be discussed further. If she'd said okay, but I still want to talk in person, I'd say everyone was fine. Her going to, I'm not gonna see you as much because you did a thing I don't like, gave her the a-hole crown. Though, you weren't without fault in the scenario, but she turned it into something dumb. NTA. I have to add another NTA with all the YTs here. You're right, there didn't need to be a debate. You were giving her a heads up about something she didn't know. If she really had a problem with what you said or didn't understand, she could easily pick up the phone. That said, a change in tone for the initial text could have made the interaction a little easier. If she's usually reasonable, which I don't know how likely that is, I would probably write similarly to you. And also ADHD here, and writing this stuff is so much easier than saying it in person. But I think it comes from a little sense of not feeling like this is a reasonable request and being overly obsequious almost to make up for that. If it were written with a more, of course you'll do this because I'm just giving you a quick heads up about something you might not notice tone, it might have landed differently. IDK, if that makes sense. But I'm thinking of the woman from the Ask a Manager blog and how she always recommends doing this. And it seems to work. NTA. A decade ago I would have said texting was cowardly, but it is another form of communication today. However, once she didn't want to text, should have picked up the phone and finished conversation. Or stop texting back and simply have fiancé call and finish it so Mill knew you were both on the same page.
If you enjoyed this video, please check out our playlists full of similar content. AmITheAsshole is like doom scrolling for your ears. Please like, share, and subscribe.